I think you'll probably agree with me when you see the actual physical examples that Heljan have got these very much right. Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you up here into the loft on Weir Yard. And today we're going to be looking at an all-new model through from Heljan. And I'm really grateful to Heljan who've sent over one of these models for review. It is of course the all-new tooled Class 25, and this is the later body variant that they've brought to the market. Now there's been a lot of discussion online about these particular models, particularly on RM Web. Seems to be a particular hotbed of discussion over these, in fact even before the physical models appeared in the UK. But I'm going to be taking a really good long hard close look at these models, and I'll tell you what I think about them in having seen them in the flesh and used them up here on Weir Yard. I'm also going to be doing a full DCC fitting guide just to help you in how to get these DCC fitted yourself, and this comes in association with DCC Concepts, makers of the Zen Black range of decoders with the innovative brownout protection that keeps your locomotives running. So stay tuned for that towards the end of the video. And if you like the look of any of the models shown or referred to today, we also have an affiliate link in the description box down below that takes you to Rails of Sheffield to be able to buy them for your own layout. So without further ado, let's get a close look at these Type 2 rats. Class 25s do seem to have become a little bit like buses, in that we wait for a very long time for newly retooled versions, and it seems that 3 are going to be along in quick succession. Heljan announced theirs. Bachmann also announced a retool of their venerable model, which was one of the early models to feature in their branch line range, and actually it's getting a bit long in the tooth. It's nearly 20 years old, but it stood up well over that period. It did have its foibles, and that's where this new generation of models hopefully comes in. We've also got an announcement from Sutton Locomotive Works following on from their Class 24 that they too are going to be looking at the 25 market, and indeed that too has generated an awful lot of hype as well. But the Heljan models are the ones that have reached the market first, and I'm really grateful to Heljan for sending over the BR Early Blue D7661 example, catalogue number 2533, to which actually I was so impressed by this model when I first took it out of the box to start the review that I actually went and bought my own Class 25, and I bought 25912 Tamworth Castle in that very distinctive ice cream van livery with silver roof, catalogue number 2538, and it's a very eye-catching livery. I just thought it would be something really a bit different to have in my fleet. The boxes are fairly standard Heljan boxes with the slide out inner. We've got a window where you can sort of make out the model, but there's an awful lot of packaging here to get through first. So I'm just going to hoik this out, and I'm just going to put those there. We get a lot of extra detail pieces as well. And then we've got some comprehensive instructions to go with these. And Heljan has tooled up for the late body versions. So I did ask when I interviewed Ben Jones about the 25.1 and 25.0 varieties, and they are not immediately on Heljan's cards for a future model, although they would actually involve pretty much a complete retool for being able to portray the different body side grills. And I guess that, to all intents and purposes, makes them a completely different model in terms of tooling required. Inside here we've got a lot of information about the class history of the Class 25, and it's actually quite an interesting read because the numbering on these locomotives isn't necessarily immediately straightforward. It also explains the Class 25 9s, which simply were a renumbering towards the end of their life, and 12 examples were renumbered, of which Tamworth Castle became quite a celebrity. We've also got information on the Dcc Fitting, and I'll be doing a full Dcc Fitting guide in association with Dcc Concepts using their Zen Black decoder. So if you're looking for some advice and information on doing that, then stay tuned towards the last third of this video. Turning that over, we've also got the full parts list, and again it just shows how much goes into one of these models, and all of these parts I believe should be available as spare parts should you need any of them. I'm going to put all that to one side. I'm just going to show you some of the detailed parts here. We've got spare buffer beam detail. We've also got some snow plows, the NEM pocket tension lock couplings, and then we also have some blanks here. Now these are colour specific for each of the models released. So if you have a BR green or two-tone green version, these do actually match with the body side. So you can actually model the locomotive as per the specific time period that you're interested in. When some of these got plated over steps, and not always did all the platings last, so it wasn't unusual to see examples where some steps were plated over but others the plating had come free, revealing the step behind. So when I spoke to Ben Jones, he said that there were so many subtle detail differences that they took a view that this was the best way to be able to represent them for the most cost-effective means. Now, out of the box, you don't really need to be bothered with any of that if you don't want to, I suppose, apart from the couplings. We've got the pretty standard clamshell packaging. I'm just going to lift this model out, and what has immediately struck me is that the shade of blue really does look nice. Now, BR Rail Blue can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge, and I know that previous releases from certain other manufacturers have struggled to get this shade right. Indeed, it's also the case that over time it did fade, but what we have represented here is probably one of the earlier BR Blue repaints. You can see there on the cab ends we've got that half yellow warning panel, and it's quite an unusual sight to see the rail blue wrapped around the top windows there. I suppose very quickly these gained full yellow ends, so we've got very much a firm transition era 6 livery from Heljan on this model, and it's really nice to see that they've got all of the little quirks that were a part of this transition to the new corporate identity style, where at least initially there was some degree of variety. So we've got the BR double arrow logos on either end of this, and then the D7661 at both ends of the body, but then we've got the TOPS data panel only at one end. The roof detail as well is quite interesting, because what has struck me is that there is a whole manner of separately applied parts with some really quite striking finish there on the printing to get these different colours, and the demarcation between them is ever so sharp and crisp. It really does bring out the detail of these roof hatches, and it is quite a difference from the models that we've had for nearly the last 20 years. The other area where Heljan has really got it right are these grills along where the curve of the roof moulds into the slab side of the body. This was an area which Bachmann on their long-running model really struggled to get this right, and it does look to me that Heljan has just got that subtle difference between the models really spot on. This here, of course, is the Bachmann model, and I'm going to be showing you a few other comparisons between these. When you place these models head to head, it is very, very apparent that Heljan have got the front face of these locomotives spot on. I know that there's been a thread on RM Web where some people have really laid into the new Heljan model even before it hit these shores, but I think you'll probably agree with me when you see the actual physical examples that Heljan have got these very much right. They did a full laser scan of a preserved Class 25, and if you measure the CADs, if you measure the model, and you compare it to the real locomotive, it does seem that Heljan have got these very, very right. On the top we have the non-working fan at the bottom of the grille, and it really does look quite nice. We don't have it able to spin, but really that's a bit of a gimmick on model locomotives in my opinion. I'm going to get this other one out now. This is Tamworth Castle. Now, you might remember that back in the day when the Bachmann Class 25 was first released, we had a limited edition version of this in this livery from Model Rail, I believe it was. And again, you can see we've got colour specific snowplows there in yellow instead of black for this later version of the Class 25. We've still got our couplings there, an extra set of buffer beam details. I'm just going to compare that, and yeah, they're exactly the same to the ones that came with the other locomotive. And then we've got the blankings to go on the body side, again in the correct colour for the model that you have bought. And you can see instantly very, very different livery. This one was very much a depot pet back in the day. It did survive into preservation, and certainly later on it did get its two-tone green livery back, which was something done for the rail tours towards the end, and that livery version is also available from Heljan. Other liveries that they've brought out include BR two-tone green with and without small yellow panels. There are a number of different tops numbered BR blue examples, including 25093 and 25252. And then there are two weathered examples in BR Rail Blue and also the two-tone green. So there are plenty of different livery versions to choose from. This particular one really does stand out in a crowd with its wraparound yellow cab ends and the number there 25912, the name on the side Tamworth Castle. The printing on that is very, very sharp and really nicely done. The rest of the detail is absolutely perfect in my opinion. And when we go below the sole bar, this is where this new model really does win hands down over the older versions. You can see there that we've got the correct profile for the bottom of the body. We don't have a mysterious skirt in there which kind of crept in on previous versions of the Class 25 from other manufacturers. We've actually got really, really fine pipework detail, and I particularly love the recessed fuel gauge in there on the fuel tank, even though it's probably safe to say that they would never have remained this clean this long. If we look between the two, I am going to compare this to the Bachmann model. I don't normally compare different manufacturers' models like this, but you can see there the difference that nearly 20 years make. That below the sole bar is just, well, out of this world on the Heljan model, and just looks so basic on that previous one as well. I don't really want to take anything away from the Bachmann model. It was great for its time, but its time was nearly 20 years ago, and it's probably well overdue for an update. You can see there between these two the difference in that front cab profile, where we've got the head code box. It all sits together much, much nicer. We've got that bigger arch on the front of the cab windows, whereas it looks so much flatter on the Bachmann model. I think if you were coming to the market now and looking to buy a 25 and were faced with the choice of the Heljan model or the older Bachmann one, there really is no contest. I'm really interested to see though what the all-new tooled Bachmann model is going to bring to the market. But to match up with the Heljan model, it really is going to have to pull something out of the bag. Looking to the roof detail, you can see that we do have detail differences there and the different exhaust ports on the model. These have all been tooled up to be accurately portrayed between the different versions as they went through their operational life. The buffers on these models are all fully sprung, and the buffer beam detail, which even though you get a spare bag of these, comes fully fitted on both ends. Now this does mean that you're going to have to remove some of this if you wish to fit couplings. On the Class 25 that I've bought for myself, I have actually chosen to leave the buffer beam detail on one end. It just seemed such a crime to remove it. It is so nicely done. And instead, I just took a pair of tweezers and a needle nose pliers to the other end. And there were quite a few almost stubborn pieces that had to be removed, one of which has been debated greatly online, but there's a small tank. You can just see the spigot where it was glued in there, and you do have to take some force to pull that out. It is a bit of a shame in a way, but if you want these locomotives to pull trains, you're going to have to do that. On the subject of pulling its train, the weight on these models is actually noticeably less than some of the other Heljan diesels that we've become used to over the last few years. And indeed, compared to the Bachmann model, there is a noticeable difference, a decrease in weight between the two. But when it came to running on the layout, I didn't really see any lack of performance because of that. The model is very sure-footed. It has twin flywheels and all-wheel drive, all-wheel pickup. And I had it pulling a 10-coach train of Mark 1s over up and down gradients without too much of a problem. And of course, in real life, these locomotives were quite often double-headed, so there comes a point where you probably should just add a second Class 25 to your train rather than complaining about the haulage capacity, because these do seem prototypically pretty accurate. The windscreen wipers on the front there might have been improved by being an etched item, but I don't think they're too bad at all. And inside the cab we really do have some nice detail. Again, I think that it would have been a little bit improved having some of the details at the back there picked out in a few different colours, but that is something that is relatively easy for the end user to do, because these cabs are incredibly easy to access when you take the top off these locomotives. Handrails around the doors do all seem, on the models that I've seen, to be crabbed inwards, but I have seen that you are able to bend them out, and it may just be that they're flattened in transit, so it isn't necessarily a bad thing. Running on DCC, one detraction for me was the lack of separately controlled cab lighting functions. It does actually have pretty good cab lights, but these come on along with the direction lights and appear to be done with the same bulb that is in the head code boxes. So it's, if you have one, you have the other. And just like driving a car with the map light on, it doesn't seem very prototypically accurate. But it's something that I suspect that Heljan will have taken on board the criticism and will be addressing that in the next run. One of the other criticisms that was levelled against these is the weight reduction holes on the bogie balance beams not all being clear. There were actually some speculation that Heljan had miscounted, but these are actually there. The N2 are sometimes found with a flash layer over the top and can be reamed out with something like a small needle file, so they are there even if not necessarily visibly there at first. So if you do get one like this example where you can see there, I've just started opening up one of the holes, and that one there is being covered flush with flash. If you look to the back, you can still see those holes, and it's just simply a case of removing some of that flash. And again, it's something that I'm sure that Heljan will look to on subsequent releases to get that sorted out. Again, we've got another one here where there's just two holes that need reaming out. And I have to say that this is something that looks far more obvious on the photographs that you see about online. But when you have the models in person, it's actually not a greatly noticeable feature unless you go looking for it. So again, it doesn't really detract from the model. And like I say, it's quite easy to just clear those holes from the flash. There's also one special commission of the Class 25s, and it really is a standout model. and that is 25102, which is being offered from TMC in two-tone green but with the tops number applied. And it's believed that this was the final example of the Class 25s to be running in two-tone green but with a tops number applied. So if you want something a little bit different for your fleet that is quite long lasting and certainly lasted into the late 1970s, then that is a superb option to consider. Also on offer from Heljan are Ethel units being provided ready to run, and I say ready to run with quotation marks invisibly applied around run. The Ethel models come without the motor or gear train, but are the same as the production models in every other way. This means that you can add a DCC decoder to them, a sound decoder, and you will be able to DCC control them even though the locomotive itself doesn't, strictly speaking, run. I have to admit that I thought that that was a strange way of doing the Ethels, and because in this day of DCC control, it would have been quite simple to just leave them as a standard production model with the motor and gear train intact, and then just double-headed them with the other locomotive in the consist. But that is the route that Heljan have decided to go down. Ethel 1 and Ethel 3 are being offered in this first production run. Ethel 1 having the very distinctive blue-grey livery to match the coaching stock, and then later on Ethel 3 gained the intercity livery, again to match the coaching stock that it was being used with. Today's DCC fitting guide comes in association with DCC Concepts' Zen Black decoder. And we've got here the correct decoder for this model, the Zen Black 21 pin, catalogue number DCD-ZN218.6. And this does also give you the option to add a stay alive as standard if you so choose, and does feature their revolutionary brownout protection. To be able to fit the DCC decoder, you're going to need your trusty set of jeweler's screwdrivers, and the one that I need to pick is the smaller of the Phillips style crossheads. The body on this model is quite easy to remove in contrast to some of the earlier Heljan diesels. What we're looking for is the 4 screws that can be accessed just by sliding the bogies to the extremes of their travel. On that side, we have the other one just over here. And then we need to repeat that for the other end of the locomotive. That one there. And then just grab firmly hold, and you'll see that the body and the chassis separate easily from each other. Now, a word of warning is that the lights for the cabs and the headcode boxes are connected to the circuit board there, so do try not to put any great stress on that, and it's probably advisable just to lay these side by side thus. You can also see here that we've got excellent access into the cabs, including full height here on the chair, so you can just get a seated figure and you don't need to carry out any kind of amputation on them if you wish to add a crew. It's also an ideal opportunity, in my opinion, to actually perhaps paint some of that bulkhead detail with a very, very fine brush, and that's a really great little project just to improve the look even further on these models. Now, the Zen Black decoder is pretty easy to fit. It comes with this lead to convert it to an 8-pin decoder, but we're not going to need to use that, so I'm just going to put that to one side. Don't throw it away, because it is a really useful way of hard wiring locomotives and keeping the decoder separate whilst you're doing the soldering. The actual Zen decoder here, we can see we've got the connection to the Stay Alive, the solder-free plug connection, and if you're worried about this wire getting in the way, if you're not wanting to use that, it's okay to cut that off. But I tend to just leave it be, because you never know in the future when you might change your mind. And there is plenty of room inside this locomotive for decoders, Stay Alives, even sound installations. There are no plans, as far as I'm aware, to offer a factory-fitted sound installation, but there are a number of aftermarket suppliers who provide Class 25 sound files on a variety of sound decoder chips. Removing the blanking plate is easy. Now you've got to provide even pressure upwards at both sides, otherwise you're liable for it to twist and break the pins, and you don't want to do that. I'm just going to put that blanking plate to one side, and then making sure that we don't stress this wire. What I'm going to do is look for the pin 1 there on the headers and match that up with the pin 1 on the Zen Black decoder. And it's very, very easy. Just place it over the pins. Don't force it. If you're forcing it, it probably means you haven't got it lined up properly. And just push it all the way home, and you can see the ends of the pins just appear at the top there. And then just make sure that you tuck the fly lead here just neatly out of the way so it doesn't protrude and get in the way of any of the screw fittings when they come through. The actual screw fittings onto the body are interesting. They do appear to be like a separately slid in fitting, but it does work quite well. And now all we need to do is just make sure, get that in the right place. And we're going to slide the body back over and just make sure that the couplings don't jam underneath, and then it's just a case of refitting those screws, and then you're done. I've had these locomotives now for about a week and a half, and that's given me plenty of opportunity to look them over, to study them, to scrutinise them, to have them running on Weir Yard, and I have to say that I have been very, very impressed. If there were just two things that I could pick out and say that they could have perhaps been done better, well, they are pretty minor things. The first one being these handrails, the way that they are bent slightly inwards around the door, but it's an easy fix. They can be bent back out very carefully, and I think it's got more to do with how the locomotives have been packaged for transit than anything else. The other little niggle is a little bit more difficult to do anything with, and that's the cab lights that come on with the head code boxes. And I think that this would have been a much better opportunity to have had them switching using some of the alternative functions that the DCC decoder can supply. And I really do look forward to perhaps that being something that Heljan update maybe for the next production run, with having just a little bit of extra wiring, if it can be accommodated, to make those cab lights separately switchable. But these really are minor niggles, and when you look back over the previous offerings that have been on the market, there just simply is no contest. That said, I'm not going to be replacing all of my previous Class 25s, but it's very clear to me that any new Class 25s that I buy are going to be from the Heljan stable. They do look head and shoulders above the previous offerings, but not perhaps enough to just junk the entire fleet. And I was a bit worried about that, because I know previously when updated models have appeared on the market, there can be a temptation to suddenly realise that your entire fleet needs replacing. And I've got around 15 Class 25s before these two turned up at Weir Yard, so I'm going to be keeping them. But as I said, I am looking to some more of the Heljan releases to be able to swell those numbers. I do love the 25, and I would put this up there as being in a similar sort of league to some of the other new Heljan offerings, and it makes me very excited to see what Heljan has been cooking up for its forthcoming Class 45s. So, turning to the scores, first up is build quality. And again, out of the box, there really wasn't any problems whatsoever with these locomotives in terms of having any loose bits. The box was completely clear, and certainly both of these examples have arrived with no damage whatsoever and no loose fitting parts. So I'm pretty impressed by the quality of that build. It also has to be said that one of the other areas where I thought that things could be prone to falling off would be that buffer beam detail, but actually it held up really, really well, to the point where when I had to remove one end, it did seem a crying shame to remove such detail additions just to fit that coupling, and it did take some doing to remove some of those components. They are very snugly fitted. So for build quality, I'm going to give this a 9.9 out of 10. On running quality, it has to be said that the model was very sure-footed, despite that shortfall in weight compared to previous Heljan releases, and indeed when comparing it like for like with the old Bachmann Class 25 model. But that weight loss does not seem to have particularly affected anything else, and it may be said that the other offerings were overweight, unnecessarily so. It handled a rake of 10 coaches with the greatest of ease, without any real serious wheel slip on the layout, and it did give a sense that if I added extra coaches on level ground, then it would quite happily keep them moving. The twin flywheels and the all-wheel drive, all-wheel pickup really do help this locomotive out and made it quite a sure-footed performer. So I'm going to give this 10 out of 10. On DCC Fitting and innovation, that has plus points insofar as getting the body off this model is pretty much one of the easiest of the Heljan stable. There really wasn't any hidden clips or anything like that to derail progress. It was just a case of 4 screws and it just slid that chassis on out. Be careful of that one wire connection that go to the head code boxes, but it really doesn't sneak up on you, and there's enough slack on that to be able to do a DCC fitting without risking any damage. It also has to be said that there was no risk of damaging any of the other detail on the model when doing the DCC fit, and that's quite pleasing because in the past I've done some DCC fits where you really do run the risk of damaging some of the more delicate detail in the process, and this was a pleasure to deal with. One detraction, of course, as mentioned before, is those cab lights. I really do wish that Heljan had used separate function outputs from the decoder to control those. But that said, it wasn't a be-all and end-all, and if it really does bother you having the cab lights lit whilst the head code lights are on, then that is something that you can quite easily remedy, either with some black electrical tape in there, painting out the bulb, or something along that ilk. It really is not difficult to turn them off if it is a deal breaker for you. So I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10. When it comes to accuracy and quality of finish, there really is no contest. These models are in another league up from anything that we've seen before in the Class 25 stable, and really the competition is going to have to work pretty hard to come up to this standard. The model does measure up to the prototype, despite the critics online that really did seem to be looking to find fault with it. I can't find those faults. The front face of these locomotives really does seem to fit the bill. It is certainly a lot better than previous offerings from other companies. So all in all, I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10, and I think that is deserved so. Certainly Heljan have captured the look of the Class 25 rats perfectly, and I really do think that the criticisms that have been levelled against this model are wholly unjustified. When it comes to price, £153 seems to be about the going rate for one of the non-weathered versions, with a small premium for the 2 weathered ones, and in addition the TMC Special Commission is at around the £170 mark, just thereabouts. So they're not the cheapest of locomotives, but they're not the most expensive either, and you do get a lot of detail for your money, We also have an affiliate link in the description box down below to take you to Rails of Sheffield to find the versions of this model that are still available, but they are selling out fast. The market is hungry for a decent Class 25, so if you want one of these, it's a case of moving quickly or having to wait for the next batch to follow these, and there is no telling how soon they may arrive. The detail on the underside of this model is pretty exquisite. The running qualities are very, very good. Its foibles, what few there are very few and far between. So I'm going to give this an 8.9 out of 10. And that gives us a final score of a very respectable 47.3. Can I recommend this model? Wholeheartedly. This is the Class 25 the market has been waiting for, and I am certainly happy to have picked up my Tamworth Castle. I'm also very grateful to Heljan for having loaned the channel D7661 for this review, and I'm sure to be picking up several more as and when I can. These are a fine model, and I am more than happy to add them to my fleet. Well, I hope this video has been really informative to you, and certainly I've really enjoyed giving you a good hard close look at this new model from Heljan. Having had two examples physically in my hands and running on the layout, I've told you exactly what I think about them, and hopefully this is something that has helped you out on making a decision on whether to buy these and add these to your fleet as well. And certainly from what I've seen today, you won't be disappointed if you choose to go down that route. Don't forget to tickle the like button and share this video too. Also consider subscribing to the channel if you've not already done so, and ring that bell to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take care of yourself, and in association with DCC Concepts, bye for now. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N. from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Graham Foster, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, and Mo Henry. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.